I want to start with something ambitious people almost never hear when their motivation drops. You're probably not lazy. What you might be is overloaded. Because the people who usually worry they become lazy are almost always the same people who have spent years being disciplined, reliable, and high performing. Lazy people don't typically question their work ethic, but high performers do. And what I see again and again with the clients I work with is this. Motivation doesn't usually disappear because someone stopped caring. It disappears because they've been carrying pressure for too long without recalibrating. Welcome back to the Sunday Scaries. I'm Eric with Emberwell Coaching, and today I want to talk about why driven, capable people sometimes feel their motivation slip, even when they still care deeply about their work and their future. Here's a distinction that changes how people see themselves almost immediately. Laziness usually sounds like, I don't really feel like putting in effort. Whereas burnout sounds more like, I want to show up like I used to, but something feels heavier now. One is avoidance, the other, depletion. And most burned out high performers aren't disengaged, they're just overextended. They've been the problem solver, the dependable one, the one who steps up when things get difficult. And eventually, very capable people hit a point where their internal bandwidth just gets tight. Not because they became weaker, because they stayed strong for a very long time. There's also something I see happen that I call achievement fatigue. And it tends to affect people who have been operating at a high level for years. At first, achievement feels exciting. Ooh. Then it feels validating. Then it just becomes the baseline expectation, and that's where things start to change psychologically. Because what used to feel like growth starts to feel like maintenance. What used to feel optional starts to feel required. And what used to feel rewarding just starts to feel normal. Without intentional recovery, achievement stops giving energy. It just starts consuming it. This is something I say often because it lands differently when people really sit with it. Most people don't lose motivation because they stopped caring. They lose motivation because they cared for too long without recovery. And for a lot of high performers, caring is just part of their identity. But caring without limits eventually becomes pressure. And pressure without recovery always turns into fatigue. Another misconception that keeps people stuck is the belief that motivation should feel natural if you're on the right path. That if you were in the right role, the right company, or even making the right moves, that motivation would just be there. But motivation is usually a byproduct, not a starting point. Clarity tends to come first, then small evidence of progress, then motivation rebuilds. Most burned out professionals aren't lacking ambition, they're lacking clarity about what's actually worth their effort now. And that's a very different problem to solve. This is also why rest alone doesn't always solve burnout. People will take time off and feel better temporarily. Oh, that trip to Mexico, amazing. But then they feel discouraged when the heaviness comes back. And it's usually because the issue wasn't just exhaustion, it was actually misalignment. Too many obligations that don't feel meaningful anymore. Too many expectations that haven't been reevaluated. Too much time performing and not enough time deciding. Real recovery often starts when someone gives themselves permission to reassess what they're carrying, not just recover, so they can carry it longer. So instead of asking yourself, how do I get my motivation back? I feel like a more useful question might be, where am I operating on autopilot in my life right now? Because loss of motivation is often less about effort and more about continuing patterns you haven't had time to question. High performers are very good at continuing. They're not always as good at pausing long enough to truly reassess. So here's what I'm curious about this week. Where in your life do you feel like you might be operating on autopilot right now? Is it your role, your workload, your expectations of yourself, the pace you've gotten used to? Drop that in the comments. Not because there's a perfect answer, but because awareness is usually where real change starts. And honestly, these conversations shape what I build future episodes around. So drop it down there when you have a moment and after you're done watching the video. So next Sunday, we're going to talk about something most high performers miss until they're much deeper into burnout than they realize. The subtle signs of mental exhaustion that still look like success from the outside. Because burnout rarely starts with collapse. It usually starts with disconnection from yourself while everything still looks fine on paper. So if you're someone who wants to build a career that's not just successful, but sustainable, make sure you subscribe and I'll see you next Sunday. And if this episode resonated with you, one thing I'd leave you with is this. Losing motivation isn't usually a sign that you need more discipline. Sometimes it's a sign it might be time to reevaluate what you've been so disciplined about. I'll see you next week.